The 1904 St. Louis Marathon. August 30th, 1904. St. Louis, Missouri. The air shimmered with a heat so oppressive it felt physical, a heavy blanket of 90-degree humidity that settled over the Francis Field Stadium. This was not merely a sporting event, it was the crown jewel of the World's Fair, a celebration of American exceptionalism and the dawn of a new century. But by the end of the day, the Olympic marathon would devolve into a grotesque circus of cheating, poisoning, wild dogs, raw eggs, and near-death experiences. It remains, to this day, the most bizarre sporting event in human history. The stage of chaos. To understand the madness, one must understand the venue. The 1904 Olympics were the first to be held in the United States, but they were unfortunately hijacked by the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, the World's Fair. The organizers treated the athletes less like Olympians and more like sideshow exhibits. The course designed for the marathon was a masterpiece of cruelty. It was not a flat loop. It was 24.85 miles of unpaved, dusty country roads that wound up and down 7 distinct hills. To make matters worse, traffic was not blocked off. Runners would have to dodge delivery wagons, trains, and people walking their dogs. But the true villain of the story was James Sullivan, the chief organizer of the games. Sullivan was a man of science, but the science of 1904 was a terrifying thing. He wanted to use the marathon to test the effects of purposeful dehydration. Consequently, there was only one water station for the entire 24.85-mile race. It was located at the 11-mile mark. Sullivan deliberately wanted to see how long human beings could function under extreme exertion without fluids. The cast of characters. At the starting line stood 32 men. It was a motley crew that looked less like elite athletes and more like the cast of a slapstick comedy. Thomas Hicks, an American born in England. He was a serious runner, but looked already exhausted before the gun went off. He was supported by a team of handlers who carried syringes, not water bottles. Fred Lors, a bricklayer from New York, a charismatic joker who hadn't trained much but figured he'd give it a shot. Felix Carvajal, a Cuban postman. He had raised money for his trip to the USA by running around Havana, but lost all his cash in a craps game in New Orleans. He arrived at the starting line wearing heavy street shoes, long trousers, and a beret. An American discus thrower, taking pity on him, found a pair of scissors and cut Carvajal's pants into shorts moments before the race began. Len Tauniane and John Machiane, the first black Africans to compete in the modern Olympics. They weren't there to race initially. They were actually part of the World's Fair's Boer War reenactment exhibit. They ran barefoot. The gun goes off. At 3:03 p.m., under the blazing mid-afternoon sun, the gun fired. The chaos was immediate. The runners weren't just battling the heat, they were battling the officials. The organizers drove ahead of the runners in automobiles. In 1904, cars did not have emission standards. They spewed thick, choking clouds of dust into the air. Within 3 miles, the dust was so thick that runners began to cough up black phlegm. William Garcia of California was found lying on the side of the road later, nearly dead. The dust had coated his esophagus and ripped his stomach lining, causing a hemorrhage. If he hadn't been found, he would have died within the hour. The Cuban Clown and the Apples. Felix Carvajal, the Cuban postman, was running surprisingly well despite his heavy shoes. However, he hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. As he ran, his hunger took over. He stopped at a spectator's car and asked for a peach. When they refused, he playfully snatched 2 peaches and kept running. Later, he spotted an apple orchard. Famished, he veered off the course, jumped a fence, and ate several green apples. The apples were rotten. Miles later, Carvajal was struck with severe stomach